Hey everyone, check out this episode with Thrive with R3, where we visit with Minnesota National Guard Colonel Ed Suarez. Colonel Suarez shares with us his profound understanding of the challenges that military personnel and their families endure, with special insights on how workplaces can help to support employees who are enlisted as military personnel, family members of those personnel, as well as veterans. There are a lot of great learnings in this one and key takeaways. You won't want to miss it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Thrive with R3. I am Jamie Gassmann, one of your hosts.
And I'm Dr. George Vergolias, your other host.
Today, we have a special guest for you, Colonel Eduardo Suarez from the Minnesota National Guard. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you on the show today to celebrate your dedication to supporting fellow soldiers and their families. It's truly an honor to have you here with us today on Thrive with R3. You've had a multifaceted career, from being a U.S. Olympic sharpshooter to an accomplished landscape architect, and then to your military service. Can you walk us through the journey that brought you to where you are today?
Looking back, it's funny. Right now in my life, I'm doing a lot of self-reflection. So great question to ask. I go back to mom and dad. I think a lot of us go back to our parents. They saw an opportunity. Oftentimes, as other folks see people in your potential more than you do. And in my case, the introduction of the shooting sports early on in my life really kind of opened doors that I never thought were possible. My dad was a former Air Force member of the Air Force. He shot on the Air Force shooting team, shot in college at San Jose State in California. And in my early teens, my mom thought I probably should be diverted away from my friends and do something different. And so the introduction to shooting sports really lent itself to a whole bunch of doors that opened up, which obviously led to my time in Colorado Springs at the Olympic Training Center, trained for the Olympics. So it's an alternate Olympic team. And in that journey, I met members of the armed forces who had a lot of shooting team opportunities. And the Army kept saying, hey, you got to come shoot for us. I'm like, I don't think I want to join the Army. But I did. After Seoul, Korea in 88 and January 89, I joined the military, active duty, and I shot for the U.S. Army shooting team down at Fort Benning, what's now called Fort Moore, and started my military career there. Just intended to shoot for the Army team, did a 4.5-year enlistment. Jennifer and I thought we should move back to the Midwest. She's from Iowa, and we went to the University of Minnesota to pursue our educational dreams, becoming an architect or a dental hygienist. And I joined ROTC. So my military journey continued. Recommended for a lot of folks that I should pursue becoming an officer. And so I started my officer career in 1986 as a traditional member, drilling 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year. Fast forward, 9/11 happens, and we found ourselves deploying overseas to Iraq, Afghanistan, all places around the world. And so the National Guard became a large presence of the military force abroad. So with that, a lot of deployments under my belt, stopped competing in shooting, but really started to learn more about myself, about why I joined the military to begin with. And over the course of my years, now 36 years in January, why I joined is much different today than it was than the day I raised my hand on January 4th of 89. So it's been an incredible journey where I am today. And as a full-time member of the National Guard since 2008, I've had all kinds of jobs, including where I am today, where I get to focus in on people, the people that I care about, the people who wear the uniform. So it's been an incredible journey.
I know that throughout your military career, you've held a lot of different roles. You've talked about those at a kind of a high level here a second ago. And my understanding is you recently transitioned into kind of a newer role. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your current responsibilities and how that requires leadership from you and how you bring leadership to that role.
So I just finished about 3 years being the Director of Communications for the Minnesota National Guard, and now I'm the Director of Culture, Resiliency, and Community Engagement. Some of the responsibilities I had as a Communications Director followed me to my new job. But really, everything we're doing now in the Minnesota Guard relates to how we focus in on the culture and climate of the organization, How are the health and wellness of our service members and our families? We've had a lot of programs and a lot of efforts for a lot of years, but we've never actually taken it under one umbrella and taken someone to say, how do we create synergy around those efforts to ensure we're doing one thing and doing it really well, and that is how do we create an environment in the Minnesota Guard where people feel like they belong, that they can reach their full potential here, and that they want to stay for all the right reasons. And in a world today where everyone's faced with recruiting and retention challenges, the military, no exception, if you watch the news, um, how important is it to focus on that? I would say it's paramount to us being mission effective. You have to have ready, resilient soldiers and airmen to do the missions for both the state of Minnesota and for our federal missions as well.
You talked a little bit about how this role is helping the soldiers within their roles in the Guard or in other branches of the military. How do you support soldiers in like either acclimating and reintegrating into civilian life, or how they manage kind of, if they're going one weekend out of the month to their National Guard duties? How are they able to kind of support that in their civilian life, especially after deployment, but also on kind of a regular basis as well?
No, I think it's a great point, Jay, because there's deployment and there's everyday service, and I think that look, we ask a lot of our service members. If you're a traditional member in the Minnesota Guard, you have a family, you have a civilian career, and a military career. You have to manage all three of those things. And then when you're deployed, it only gets more challenging to do that because of the separation and having loved ones stay back here and take care of families. So we've always had a focus on taking care of people. But really, I would say around 2005, 2006, I think was a transformational period for the Minnesota Guard as we created and launched the Beyond Yellow Ribbon Reintegration Program, which became a national program DoD wide. And the premise behind that program, just from a deployment perspective, was how do we ensure to make sure that before we go to deployment, while we're deployed, and when we come back, that we have done our best to make sure families are ready for the challenges while their loved ones deploy forward, that while you're gone, the family back home will be taken care of. And when you get back, the ability to transition back to what I always call your new normal. Because I will tell you, after being deployed, what's 3 months, or in my case, up to 22 months, life is just a little bit different. It's going to be. I think it's normal. And helping people make that transition back does a number of things. One is it acknowledges their sacrifice for being gone for the time, but ensuring that when they go back home, if they decide to stay in the military, that they know that there is a path forward. It's care for them, care for the families, and still have a prosperous and healthy life moving forward. Because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to deploy if we could. We couldn't re-enlist folks if we could. We wouldn't have the forces we need moving forward.
It's interesting. Again, you've got me thinking about so many different things. Early career, one of my my residency internship was at the Durham VA Medical Center, and 2 of my 4 rotations was in the trauma units, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. I dealt a lot with that, and I'm old enough that I was working with Vietnam vets. And one of the things that was so shocking, and actually I worked with a few World War II vets at that time. And by the way, I'm tying this into the transition piece. What was fascinating to see and learning from them is, and I'm curious what your thoughts of this are, Ed. After World War II, most of the soldiers returned home on ships, which was it took weeks to come home. There was a natural decompression time period while they were, and then they were laid over in Hawaii if they were in the Pacific theater, or in England if they were in the Europe theater. Vietnam was different. You would get your return papers. You'd be on a flight and you'd be back home in middle Iowa within 36, 48 hours, sitting at the kitchen table with family who just acted like, oh, there's George from the George we remember from 3 years ago. But that George wasn't the same George. I'm curious how you view that transition and pacing out transition and the difficulties that the loved ones have, because they just want to embrace that soldier as they knew them. But when they're in tough environments and tough theaters, they're exposed to some really tough stuff. I'm curious what your thoughts are there, if you have any on that.
I'll go back to my second deployment. We call the long deployment here in Minnesota. We actually went to Iowa a week after I got back from deployment. I do remember sitting back and not feeling like I was there. I wasn't. I felt like other than Paul, my brother-in-law, who was a Vietnam veteran, would understand what I was feeling, because I still wasn't home yet. It was much too early for a gathering like that. And I think that still resonates today, that we can't just assume that we can come back and pick where we left off. We've known that for a long time. And Vietnam folks experience the same thing too. And we know that even today, hence the reason why I brought up the reintegration program, how we reintegrate soldiers. There's a methodical process. When people come back from deployments now, there's 2 touch points, about 30 days after they get back and about 69 days after they get back, to bring to bear services available in Minnesota, understanding transition points with family, relationships, financial. We bring all those things, because the worst thing we can do assume is, even if you're a second or third time deployer, that, you've got it all figured out. Well, life changes all the time. And so not every deployment while you're gone, you come back, is going to feel the same way. And so we've learned a lot over the years. We have to have a deliberate process to help reintegrate folks back. And what's happened over the last 15, 20 years in Minnesota is the services that are available have expanded greatly, whether it's services we provide internally in the organization that are funded by DoD or National Guard Bureau, or nonprofits. I mean, there is so much help. It's almost even a bigger challenge is tracking all of the support services out there and how to best direct people to the right service for the right problem at the right time.
And you kind of touched on this a little bit. And I know George kind of brought it up with like the families, what's some of the unique ways that you're helping families? I know when we were kind of prepping for this call, you mentioned that some focus targeted towards them, because when they're going, when they've got a loved one deployed, they're going through kind of the fear of that, particularly depending on what type of a deployment that individual is on. What kind of support are you providing to those families? So, particularly like maybe if they have children, how are they coping with that, parent who's abroad and might be in harm's way? So maybe touch a little bit on that in terms of your new role and how that is supporting the family members, because they're going through their own journey with the deployment and the impact of that as well.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the impact on the family while their loved one is deployed forward. Those are real challenges. And, it's different for families with young children who are in their teens, and so forth. So those dynamics are quite different. There's different challenges that go with that. We have a family programs program here in Minnesota National Guard, and a youth programs as well. So through those programs and initiatives, there is programming opportunities. Like on the youth side, like our kids have been involved with the Minnesota Youth Camp up at Camp Ridley since they were 10 years old. In fact, Antonio, our oldest, he turns 25 in 2 weeks. He is now a camp counselor at the camp that he started when he was 10 years old. We create opportunities because, military families relate to each other. It's very hard for folks outside of that military system to understand the challenge of deployment or serving. But with opportunities like our youth camps and youth programs, opportunity for kids to get together who have had similar experience, and through that shared experience really helps them build the resiliency and coping with those challenges. And for families in general, there are family support groups at every unit level. There's education for those folks to help educate and bring services to bear for challenges. And there's nonprofits like the Minnesota Military Family Foundation that does grants for families with financial stress. So there's so much we can do. And like I said earlier, the biggest challenge is do we know what the problems are? Because families are very proud people, all right? And service members, the same thing. We're not very good at asking for help. And oftentimes we do, it's almost too late. And so our challenge as leaders is how do we ensure our service members and families are open to telling us how they're doing? And that's creating touch points and opportunity to engage each other to know what's happening.
Yeah, that's great to hear that you have that built-in support, because it is, and full disclosure, and Jamie, I know that you also come from a military family, right? And you did a lot of relocating at a young age related to that. My father was, I don't even know if this term is is used as much, but back in the day, he proudly called himself a jarhead, right? He was a Marine, fought in Korea. And so it's interesting because he always used to tell me it's a unique club that unless, like you said a minute ago, Ed, if you're not in it or you haven't been through it, you don't really understand it. And so my follow-up question is, considering transition, considering the support not only do you give to military personnel but their families, what are some of the unique challenges that military personnel and families bump into that require kind of a unique approach? Help lay people understand some of those unique challenges.
First, I'll say this, that I think early on in the height of the global war on terror, a lot of deployments, that service members were victims. We're not victims. We're humans, right? And we face challenges. We face adversity, and some cope better than others, and some don't. But within that context, some of the biggest challenges I see now, like mental health is a big problem today. We've done a lot breaking down the stigma in the military about acknowledging mental health, that it's real, that affects the individual soldier or airman or the family member. So we've gotten much better. So we're more aware of what those mental challenges are, and we have more services to bring to bear to help address those challenges where people feel like, you know what, I need to check myself, right? So that's been great. The other piece too is I think financial. Over the course of the years, in different periods of economic struggles and the economy has obviously impacted service members. And I think that financial literacy is something that we address now. We have financial counselors on board. Even our mental health team has gotten much better. And right now, we're really focusing on prevention is the big goal. We've had a lot of things that look at sort of the treatment side of things. But now we're focusing on prevention. What are those risk factors that we see now? How can we understand what they are, get ahead of them, and start addressing those before they become real problems? And so, but I think, but the challenges don't change much, year to year, decade to decade. I think when it comes to mental health and finance, family relationships, those things are still there. The biggest thing is we have more resources to bring to bear.
I have to share a story. When you talk about military families get other military families, I was actually at a conference in the last month, and sitting across from me was a gal who was also a military brat like me. Her dad was in the Army and she grew up traveling all over. In fact, we were in some of the same places, just at different times. But it was just amazing the instant connection we had as if we knew each other from a former life, even though we didn't know each other at all. But there is just something to be said of that camaraderie that comes with military families. And I know growing up, that's how when you lived on post and went to school, that's how it felt. Everybody was your friend because we moved. Your friend could be up and gone in like a day or two just because of her dad being relocated or mom being relocated. Want to kind of talk a little bit about family impact and kind of support systems and kind of dive into a little bit kind of in your own space, your own family, Ed. Being military family, we know comes with different challenges. I think my biggest challenge was moving to civilian life. That was the hardest transition because everything I knew was completely changed. And I didn't understand the civilian school world and people and how they would, particular, brands were of importance when that wasn't even the case in military life for us. We just wore what the PX sold. So can you share, how you and Jenny and just for our audience, I know he's mentioned Jennifer and Jenny. Jenny is his wife, and your children have navigated life during your service. How have you guys kind of approached that, for yourselves and just kind of talk through a little bit about, what that's been like?
I think during deployments, Jen described it a lot as just being in survival mode. One we learned is it's we put these expectations on ourselves unnecessarily about the house got to be clean and all these other things. That I think for Jennifer, how she managed that while I was gone was just focusing on the basics. Like what are the absolute things? I got to feed my kids. I got to get them to school. I mean, and I think having real expectations helps a lot. I don't think we had that figured out in the first deployment. I think on the second deployment, we were a little more educated on what things worked, what didn't work. And we were able to navigate that differently. The kids were also older too, but having a purpose and having a goal and something to focus on every single day was really helpful. Like the kids had to look forward to something, just to kind of buy the time, because when they got older, this idea of time was much more real to them. And so, and I was able to talk to them more on the second deployment, and certainly much more on the third deployment. So that helped a lot. But I think that what a lot of families have learned over the years and how we navigate these different challenges while we're gone is having a plan before you even go. Right? And I think on our last one, Jennifer and I did that the best, because we kind of understood expectations going into it, and that really helped a lot. The biggest challenge I think that we had is coming back sometimes. Is, I've been gone for a year, making decisions, carrying a lot of responsibility, and I remember that the first second deployment I came back, like I was done making decisions. Well, so was Jen, and I didn't realize that. It's like, I'm tapped out too. I'm done and you're done. We did not talk that piece all the way through, because you're both carrying the load so much from each other's perspective. And I think our third deployment, we did a much better job understanding that about each other and just being more open and frank about it before I even got home.
So, and looking at that reintegration process, what advice do you have, Ed? I mean, I know you kind of talked about, have a plan. It's really important that you have a plan. You've talked through all those kind of key things that you're going to be navigating as you kind of move through that, year-long deployment, 2-year-long deployment. What are some advice points you have for other military families, or even maybe workplaces, and how maybe they can support a family member who might be still back at home trying to navigate, kind of you know, the normal family day to day and keeping everything kind of moving forward?
Assumptions are terrible things to make, right? For one, I think expectation management is another thing. I would say, especially in today's age now, like right now we have the 34th Red Bull Division deployed forward in the Middle East. Well, on today's technology, like a lot of these folks are texting now, they're calling home regularly, they're FaceTiming. That interaction is more frequent than ever before. A lot of commanders will tell you it's too much interaction because you're almost there's something to say back in the 15, 20 years ago when knowing less was better, right? Because honestly, what are you going to fix from 10,000 miles away? Probably not a whole lot. But in today's age of communication and instant communication, there's pros and cons of that. But the upside is that you're now more in tune with your family. So along with having a plan, you probably have an understanding of, hey, what things are you going to talk about, right? And have an expectation for that call. Hey, this is a call we're going to talk about business, right? Family stuff. Or this is a call where it's just fun, we're laughing, we're talking to the kids. Think about how you want to communicate when you have those touch points, because there are some times when Jen put the kids off to the side, and like her and I are just going to talk now, right? And I think understanding how you're going to communicate and when you're going to do it, I think is part of that plan.
One of the unique variables with being military, well, just in the military and being deployed and being a military leader, is that there's loss that can happen, right? And whether it's in an exercise or even in a hostile environment, right? Bringing one's team back as a leader, right, is obviously priority one. And that's an incredible feat when one can do that. But we know that there's risks involved with these deployments. And I'm curious how in your kind of decorated career, I think you've been deployed a number of times now to hostile environments. Can you talk a little bit about the leadership experiences of being in charge of other people, and probably, younger soldiers, less experienced soldiers, and the immense responsibility of bringing them back and how that has shaped you?
Yeah, I'm thinking back. I usually go back to my second and longest deployment is probably the most challenging. I was a company commander for that, so I had 70 folks under my my responsibility. The one thing I tried to do the most, and I had a great first sergeant who was my battle buddy the entire time. We talked a lot about keeping the guys busy, right? Hey, when there's downtime, there's complacency, there's a lot of time for other things to creep in, but keeping folks purposely driven every single day was really important because it did a lot of things, especially in a place like when we're in Iraq running combat missions. it was really important to stay on your game. So having a purpose and a mission and a reason to get up every day and to look after each other kept you on your game because you were doing all the right things. And how does it translate to everyday life? I would say it's like living your life with purpose. So looking back at myself now, when I think about my time on deployments, this high intensity operations tempo where you're just working all the time. That translate for me today is how to live my life with purpose. And I find myself probably doing more than I should. And ask Jennifer that I say yes to too many things versus saying no. But I do believe that that's one of the, I would say, benefits of deployment. Something you bring back with that is how do you continue to live that purpose-driven life every day? What gets you up every day? What fills your cup every day? Because on deployments, that mission accomplishment, that teamwork, it's the one thing that keeps you going every single day. And I think that in everyday life, we could use a lot of that as well.
I'm thinking about how you are helping yourself mentally and emotionally is kind of where I want to go with that. So with your purpose driven, you know, filling your bucket each day, keeping yourself busy, what are some of the ways, and maybe that is the way that you're kind of, helping yourself from a well-being perspective, by staying busy, having kind of that purpose with everything that you're doing. Can you share a little bit about how do you manage your own mental well-being and how do you help others, like maybe some other soldiers that you're leading? How do you help them to make sure that they're taking care of themselves and seeking the help that they need to seek? What are ways that you can kind of help to identify that? And maybe first share a little bit about how you do it and then how you help others to do that.
Like I think overall, I think I've done a pretty good job managing. But there are times when I don't think I'm doing as well as I probably should. I think maybe that's just human nature. What I've learned is to kind of check myself and talk to Jen about it. So I don't say I'm like the living perfect example of how to do it right. But I think there's a lot I can share with people about acknowledging when you're having some tough times and what do you do with those times and how do you get the help you need. I think now as leaders, we're just more aware of the challenges every day. A lot of the young folks that are recruiting today come with a lot of mental health issues. It's one of the biggest road stops to enlistment today is mental health. And so I think we've already got a mindset behind us. I think as today's leaders, knowing that's the case, it's easier to refer someone about getting a checkup and seeing how you're doing. And we have a lot of programs that bring that out in us. New program called the Holistic Health Program, which really focuses on 5 different domains. Everything from, I'm going to look at my notes real quick, so I apologize. But sleep and spiritualness, nutrition, mental health, and physical. Those 5 domains really encapsulate everything about the human dimension we have to look at and how we care for ourselves. And I think we're just better at it at identifying what those challenges are. And so I'm hopeful moving forward that as we sort of inculcate that understanding across the force, that people know that when they're struggling, there's lots of ways to get help.
With these, increased awareness to resources and help that's out there, and talking about it, being more open about it, do you see a shift in that, I'm too proud to get that kind of help or show that weakness? Is there more people seeking it than where there were before?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, let's talk the physical side, and we have a comprehensive fitness course now that people who struggle with meeting uh, the physical fitness standards, now we have a 2-week course that you can go to help learn about nutrition and health and physical wellness. Because, we assume that just because we've been in the military for 5, 6, 20 years, that we got it all figured out. We don't necessarily. And we have ways to help people relearn those skill sets to be properly fit. Look, we all come in different sizes and different walks of life, so not everyone's going to be the picture of fitness. But within our own being who we are, we've done a much better job of understanding what it means to be mentally and physically fit. We talk about it a lot more, and we have programs to help people achieve that wellness they want to strive for.
We have long accepted, I think, partly in the military, but especially in sports, the idea that you don't suck it up, right? If LeBron pulls his hamstring, no one expects him to play in the next game. Now with the advances on physical therapy and what those NBA teams can afford, maybe he'll play in game 2 or 3, 4 down the road. But everyone expects, yeah, he pulled his hamstring. He needs to sit out, so we need him for the playoffs. But in our personal lives, we don't afford that same recovery, right? And recuperation. It's refreshing to hear that you guys are putting such a deep value in the military.
Yeah, because if you don't have a culture that says, okay, take a knee, yeah, then you're going to injure something. You're going to lose someone potentially, either temporarily or long term. So, in an era of we're recruiting less people and we got to retain as many folks as we can. It's a darn shame to lose someone to a medical reason.
If you could give a returning soldier advice, as well as a spouse or just a loved one advice, the top thing you'd recommend for them to consider when a soldier or a deployed military personnel is coming back home, what would that advice be? What would that takeaway be?
I'd say patience. If I gave one word, it'd be patience. Maybe an ounce of grace and empathy wouldn't hurt either. And I say it for a couple of reasons. One is, and I said it before, the loved one who's been at home has endured all kinds of stress just managing things at home. Your deployed loved one, same thing. And there has to be patience when you get back. It's just going to take time. And you can't rush something like that. Everybody's different. Every couple, every family structure will transition at their own pace. So I think patience is the number one thing.
One last question. I just think because, you've had such a amazing career, both civilian and military. Really want to celebrate that and have an opportunity for you to share what were some of your most rewarding moments that stand out. You've talked a lot about, areas that, I maybe didn't always have it right, but I did my best, patience and grace and space. And you've celebrated Jennifer a lot, and she's an incredible Army wife. So there's a lot to be celebrated there. What would be your most rewarding moments that stand out that you want to share with our audience?
We always talk about the day you come home is the best day, right? Why wouldn't it be? But I've had lots of other moments. Look, I've been given a lot of opportunities serving in the military. I haven't even talked about my time on the Army shooting team, which is a whole other thing. But I think it's more of the sort of those human touch points I've had with people and experiences that resonate the most. I'd say my job in the last 3-4 years has probably been the most fulfilling it's ever been. Never thought I'd be doing the work I've been doing in the community, meeting just amazing people from amazing cultures. I just think that I have the best job in the world as I get to not just represent the organization that I proudly serve in, but to make these human connections with people to see the humanity behind the uniform, and for us to see the humanity in just people who live in our community. It's been a very rich experience.
Appreciate you being on the show, Ed. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights and personal experiences and growth opportunities. It was very insightful, and I'm sure our audience got a lot of great takeaways and probably a better understanding of that military lifestyle.
Well, I hope so. And again, thanks for inviting me over, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you all for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Thrive with R3.
R3 is a workplace behavioral health pioneer and innovator, providing rapid response and ongoing behavioral health solutions that help people and organizations recover, perform, and thrive in the wake of disruption and stress.
For more episodes, insights, and resources, visit thrivewithr3.com.